All right, we're live.
Live. Number 14 now.
We're officially a teenagers.
Exactly. We are well into the teenage era of this stream slash podcast.
That's right. So, I'll share my screen so we can see the tweet.
Let's get right into it.
But it's a topic that I think we've discussed just when we talk amongst ourselves, and something I probably tweeted about as well, but it's something that I think Adoptee Twitter talks about a lot, and I think it's also a topic that periodically creeps up again just in the sort of cultural zeitgeist because parenting, which we've talked about, having kids, just adoption, all this stuff sort of always is, it's always something that people talk about, right? Because it's just a huge
Absolutely.
part of life. And I think also because of just the way the moment we're having culture, or have had for the last few years, uh, LGBTQ and those issues and those groups of people, um, they're always sort of, it, out there. People are always talking about them, right?
Yeah,
And
recently, these people are invoked as a part of a moral panic
right,
as it relates
right,
to being bad influences on children sexually. Which
right, exactly.
we'll get into. We'll get into that.
By
Uh,
exactly, I mean, yes, I agree that like they talk about it. Not that
we don't agree
exactly.
with
I
that
don't agree with
sentiment.
that sentiment.
That is bad, as you'll soon find out as we elaborate.
Yeah. So the reason why I say that, it to sort of set the table, is that this is not something new. It's not new. It's not something we just sort of like have thought about for like the last couple of days. Like this is something I've thought about for many, for years.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share my screen here, and this is the tweet. Um, and I guess this is the account of a gay couple, and it said, as many of my followers know, or just one guy of the couple, right?
Yeah.
Husband and I are navigating the adoption process in the hopes of bringing home a baby. So I guess yay,
Wonderful.
it's wonderful. I guess as many of the followers so I guess something, maybe, I don't know. Does he have like? I'm just checking quickly. A pop culture
Yeah,
podcast.
pop culture podcast. Blonde hair, but a heart of coal.
Guess he's been featured on Page Six, Reality T, Screen Rant, Gawker, BuzzFeed, and more.
Wow.
Um,
That could be us one day.
yeah. uh, so I guess probably something that he's talked about on his podcast. I know this is an unorthodox, but you never know who you might reach on here. If you or anyone you know is pregnant and considering adoption, please think of us. So this is actually not unorthodox. Social media is used very frequently. Maybe not Twitter specifically, but Facebook, Yahoo, when that was a thing, but Facebook primarily,
Yeah.
is used to search for and advertise that couples are welcome to adopt or looking to adopt. So this is not, using social media or reaching out in this way is not unorthodox. But and then there's this picture of, very curated picture of them. This is the blonde guy, probably, and this is his
Very
partner.
handsome couple, very fashionable.
Sure, yeah. So I mean, but
Outdoorsy, they're fit.
yeah, and this is also what's used in these advertisements. Is sort of like this very, very, uh, edit. I mean, probably edited, but like a very curated,
Yeah, very
marketing
curated
sort of
moment.
like, polished sort of image to appeal to, as you said, someone who's pregnant and maybe not very sure about what they want to do, or is just in a vulnerable state, right?
Yep.
Um, so this picture and others like it in these sort of advertisements are used to sort of paint this picture of like, oh, we're we're fairly affluent, right? Look at us, we're happy, we're a happy couple.
Yeah, do we look poor in this picture?
Yeah, we
No.
can't look. We're out in the woods, and I obviously had a friend of ours take this photo.
And whenever I see heavily curated moments like
And
this, I think to
yeah, and like
myself, how many attempts did this take? Was this like attempt number 5 at the photo?
who knows? Yeah,
Yeah.
probably, right? Something like that. And it and this really struck me because and they have more, right? And of course, they have
Oh
their
yeah, they have
own
their own website
website.
for it.
They have their own website for it. Again, not unique, not unorthodox. This happens thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of times a year,
Hmm.
right? Constantly, constantly. Um, and there are people who've actually made lots of money, uh, as like family vloggers and such, about their adoption journeys, right? I mean, this is like a genre of the family vlog
Yeah.
sort of social media influencer type of space. Um, and I don't I don't want to like call it out just because they're queer doing it, because my problem isn't with anything about their identity.
Hmm.
Like, it's that they're advertising for someone to give them their child, right?
Exactly.
And I don't think anyone should do that. And I don't think, I think we've been fairly consistent that I think that adoption should be hard for anyone to do, that the process should be much more rigorous than it is.
And heavily
And
regulated.
right. And I don't care who, I'm actually sort of against the idea of some of these, like usually religious organizations that have like a religious criteria, right? And won't,
Yeah.
or won't like help queer families, adopt, right? Like,
Hmm.
there's nothing inherent about anyone's identity that's going to make them better as parents for anyone's kids, right?
Yep.
So that is not my problem with this. Like, the fact that I don't like them doing this, I would say that to anyone who did any of this.
Me too.
Um, so, but whenever anyone, an adoptee, like most of the vitriol when it comes to like the negative, like whenever anyone sort of, points out the realities of what adoption means, and maybe
Yep.
this is not cool that we um, allow these couples to basically advertise that, like, and try to compete as like who's the most
We're
picturesque
open to take your
family,
baby.
right? Um, the most, the worst reactions are always to the adoptees who say this, right?
Yep.
A lot of times, like non-adoptees who say it won't get attacked nearly as viciously as the adoptees who point out basically and say basically the same stuff, right?
Yep.
Um, yeah, and that movie that Chris is pointing out, Knock at the Cabin movie, I don't know if that's out yet, but I'm like, again, that movie again, like, it's another movie where they introduce adoption into the plot. Why? And it's a white gay couple with an Asian daughter, right? It's probably Chinese.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'd never even heard of that. Like, I'm hoping it's like a genre horror movie, kind of like Get Out, where like the Asian daughter is in this nightmare of a situation, and this couple is evil. But who knows? I actually don't even know. I hadn't heard of this movie until just now. So
So then this person, yeah. So I don't know. I mean, it's an M. Night Shyamalan movie. Um, it's a horror, probably some horror suspense movie because that's all he does. Um, yeah, I have to read more about it.
yeah, I guess if it's like a mainstream blockbuster release, I imagine it going with the typical trope of here's this evil adopted child who went through something traumatic and now they're fucking weird. So
So randos show up to the family's house and say that one of them has to die to prevent the end of the world. Ah, so okay.
okay, that's a new take.
That's a new premise. Then why did the couple have to be why did the daughter have to be adopted?
Yeah. That's a good
With
question.
M Night Shyamalan, it's you're right. Probably it's going to be like the Asian child is like the Antichrist or something.
Yeah, that's what it's
The
been thus
twist.
far. Yeah.
You can basically, other than the first movie he ever made, you can basically predict everything.
Yep.
Um, uh, but so someone actually replied and said, "Look, maybe maybe you should be supporting birth parents to keep their children." And yes, my hopes are non-existent on it being any good. The movie. So whenever anyone points out that like maybe you would the hopeful adoptive parents, right? Whenever anyone like points out to them, maybe you should like just support birth parents instead of
Yeah.
taking
Reflect
their
on this
child,
critically.
right? Like reflect on this critically, right? And be like, or are you just being selfish, right? Are you just talking
Hmm.
about your feeling about your own needs rather than the child's needs, right? Uh, and they link to an article from a queer man, and then the so someone of their same identity, right, who presumably would have similar sort of um, have to deal with this similar,
Yeah, like
issues
life
or life
experience or
experience
similar questions they've
about
asked
like
themselves.
right about the fact that they're queer, and unless they're going to, same complications right around that,
Yep.
showing solidarity, right, with adoptee activists who basically just ask the question of like, why are we putting so much money and resources into um, helping people adopt babies when we maybe should be, supporting the birth parents so they can raise their children, right?
Yep.
And then the guy's response is, "I appreciate your input."
That's what I kept chuckling at preemptively, was I kept seeing that response, that very sort of passive aggressive white person
Basically,
in an office response.
I'm
I
not going to do
appreciate
shit.
your input.
I'm going to do what I want.
Yeah, no,
Which
exactly.
okay, fine, but
And I guess, when I think about the issue just kind of zoomed out, thinking about it more deeply, I guess when I think about the people that I know, the experiences that I've had, I would say on average that the average queer person or the average LGBTQ person probably is better equipped emotionally and just in terms of thinking critically about society and their place in it, that I would tend to trust a gay couple more than your average heterosexual couple, in terms of like the amount of effort it would take to have a child and the amount of reflecting they needed to do to get comfortable enough to even acknowledge their own identity. Where I
uh,
guess, I,
yeah,
I mean, I would say outside of the adoption circumstances, I would say,
yeah.
yeah, more likely than not, I would lean toward them being better emotionally prepared to deal with the kinds of things that come up with kids growing up. However, however,
Yeah,
I'll say that just because I think that's the case generally
right.
doesn't mean that I think this particular scenario where you've got a gay couple, and in the original tweet, and this is kind of a buried lead here, is that specifically they are looking to get into contact with a woman that is already pregnant and is planning on giving up their baby, which they tacitly acknowledge somewhere in there that this is not an orphan. This is not a child without a family or without parents. This
Right,
is
right.
specifically looking for a child that is meant to be given up right around the time of birth. So there's a certain entitlement that comes to what kind of child they would want to adopt because it fits their desires rather than seeing what's out there. And if there's, say, someone in foster care that actually is in some sort of situation where there was egregious abuse, or there were circumstances where they can't be connected with other family members, where I could say, okay, yeah, I think in that sort of case, you could
Yeah, but
argue,
that baby that kid's gonna be messed up.
yeah,
They don't want that. They don't wanna have to
exact,
deal with that.
and that's what I
That's
think it
too
speaks
hard,
to.
man. They don't that's too
Yeah,
hard.
it speaks to this notion of, hey, we're a gay couple, and we want to have a child, but we want to have it on our terms. And in this case, we want to have a completely blank slate for us to shape and mold in whatever way we
A
like.
presumably blank slate, but yeah, I
Yes.
get what you're saying. Yeah, and this is what also always happens is that they're like, we have adoption in our family. Like, dude, I don't care. You're not adopted.
Yeah.
You don't know what that means. Like,
Yeah, they could
you
just be
made
saying
it,
nice shit to you because they don't feel comfortable sharing like their real thoughts with you.
and one experience of having like a family member or maybe a cousin or they don't even say like
Hmm.
it could immediate families. Okay, maybe a sibling.
Sure.
Um, that doesn't mean anything. Like, it really doesn't mean anything.
To me, that's like the adoptee version of I have a black friend.
Right, or Asian wife guy, right?
No, exactly. Just
Um,
I know someone from this circumstance, therefore I know it's good. And if it's good, then it's good for us. Let's do it.
yeah. Um, and just sort of like he look at how much he responds, or to someone who's like, oh, I wish you luck, and all all the exclamation points, thank you, right? And then when someone's like, maybe you should just sort of think about this more, it's like, I appreciate your thinking, right? Um,
So actually, just to back up a tiny bit, how did you run into this post? Because I think I ran
uh,
into it separately as a promoted post.
I think someone that I follow probably quote tweeted it.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly, but something like that. Um, what I had another thought that popped up, but if it's important, it'll come back to me. But
It'll come back to you.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, this whole phenomenon is sort of it. I don't know. I find it gross. Oh, and what I find funny though is like, okay, so part of this also is that I assume they're also going to ask for money, right? So,
Ah, yeah.
right, like let maybe we go to their website, see if
Let's
they
take a
actually
quick
ask for
look.
money.
Let's double check.
Um, okay,
They both like Ariana Grande. The last race bender.
and I hate this shit. Forever home to bring him home.
That's for
Forever
dogs.
home, forever, like because the oh, and I was going to mention, right, because when you're talking about like in general, you would think, and this is how way I've used to think, but just too many examples to sort of try to have abused me of this notion. But logically, it would make some sense that you know people who are of some sort of identity group or some sort of right, like gay, queer people who are not who are sort of marginalized or not the majority or out of the norm, right? And who might have experienced some bad treatment would maybe be a little bit more equipped to adopt and maybe raise someone with that sort of trauma and experience in their life. But then I think of like the heart children and the fact that they were
Oh,
raised by two white
yeah.
lesbian
Yep.
ladies, very women, and they got fucking murdered, right? They were
Yeah.
abused their whole lives after, before then, and then they were fucking straight up murdered, right?
Yep.
So it's like, and there are story after story. Like every day, you could probably look up and you could see that there's another story of abuse and neglect of someone who was adopted into a family, right?
Yep.
And it's all sorts of families, right? There's no identity group or pairing or whatever permutation of couple who is adopted that you know there isn't an example that of some horrendous situation. So I don't look at anyone's identity usually, even if they were Asian. I wouldn't make an assumption, right? That they're going to be any better at raising this child than anyone else. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I mean, they have 3 dogs.
Okay.
Um,
Oh,
they have a
named
lot of
after
support.
Friends characters. I think I can tell what they're all about.
And
Oh,
this
and they live in
website,
Arizona. I didn't
yeah,
even know that.
this is like just this is how, I mean, this is a well put together one. So they whoever, a friend of theirs has a very, is a talented web designer.
Yeah.
But this is how these things are set up, right? Where every picture is extremely curated, polished. All the stuff that they talk about here is how they have a village, not just them, so the the child will have all this support, and they have a lot of support. This is very, like, this is tailored to um, appeal as much as possible to you know I guess birth mothers, right?
Yeah. Vulnerable birth mothers who are like, well, I don't know if I can take care of this baby, but it looks like these people can.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily even fault someone who might be, a woman who might be pregnant and not quite sure. And they might look at this type of thing and be like, you know what? Do I really want to struggle? Do I really want to, if they're in such an uncertain situation, do I really want to do this? Maybe it is better, right? So I don't fault, the women so much. Because this is designed to be as manipulative as possible.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think it follows just the general American model of whoever has the most compelling and attractive narrative and ad campaign around whatever they would like to happen
yeah,
is the one that ends up having nice things happen. Wow, we know exactly what their house layout looks like.
yeah, right. Where's Meet Our Village? Meet our grandpa.
I mean, these are just people. I'm not.
They're all their friends, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I don't know. Like, it just, the vibe, like, the vibes are off. Like, and it's not just them, right?
Yeah.
Any of these pages, it just gives you the
Yeah.
creeps thinking about that this stuff exists.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, again, I think it speaks to a question that I've brought up several times on this stream at this point, which is who knows about adoption? Who thinks about it as a plausible option for themselves? And what kind of people end up with having a child? And, I guess uh, being gay makes it more likely to sort of limit the options that you have.
sure.
But at the same time, I think about just adoptive parents in general. And, I think a lot of things these families share in common, or these married couples share in common, is a certain sense of being a savior and a certain sense of entitlement of, hey, there's this kid coming from a poor family, or we presume to be a poor family. And hey, we might need some donations to make this adoption possible too. But, we've been waiting a real long time and we've been in love for a long time and we have a village surrounding us. And I really think we deserve that child.
Right.
So,
Deserve, right? They
yeah.
deserve it.
I mean, of course, they
They're
don't
entitled
explicitly
to it.
use that language, but I mean,
Right.
based on the pretty narrative that they're spinning with these very nice sentimental photos, I mean, that's certainly what it's implying.
Yeah, and even this particular couple seems pretty well to do, so maybe they don't need the financial help. But most, a good percentage of them do, right? So
Yep.
they're just their GoFundMe's and church drives and fundraising drives, and they just have fundraisers to do this. And in those cases, even more clearly than this particular one. But the cases where the adoptive couple needs to, like,
Yeah.
fundraise to do it, it's even more crazy that sort of is praised, but no one thinks, like, well, what if what if we took that
Yeah.
charity money and, like,
Yeah,
helped
not
people.
have that child displaced from their
Yeah.
natural parents.
Um, because it's about the disruption and the displacement. That's a big part of it. Um,
Absolutely.
and people can pretend that blood relation doesn't matter, but it does matter.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you can say platitudes all day of, love being unconditional, or, everyone deserves this sort of familial love. But the reality is things are a lot more complicated than that. And just because we have these certain ideals or certain images that we have in our minds of, what other people's lives are like, at the end of the day, someone needs to live with the consequences of these actions and these decisions made. And I mean, just based on the sort of like ratio on the posts that are saying, "Hey, maybe you shouldn't fucking do this shit," is showing that adoptees saw this and they had a pretty strong response
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah. Like, look at this. Like, it's like, why is it amazing? Are you thinking of the child? No one wants to be adopted. No one. And then these fucking pricks, they're like, wrong. Some people
Wrong.
wish they were. Don't speak for everyone on the planet, bro.
That
Look,
sucks. You don't even know what you're talking about.
there are a lot of people who are in shitty situations. Okay. Most people wouldn't be like, I want to be adopted. They just want to be away from that situation.
Yeah.
Right. Um, and this is where people like who don't know what the fuck they're talking about, and what adoption actually entails, or what it's like the grass is always greener, or they're like, they think they know what it means, but they don't actually know what it means. They 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 just talk when they should just say nothing.
Yeah. I mean, you can just as easily keep it moving. Acknowledge to yourself, hey, I don't really fucking know anything about this topic, and I don't really know any people that are adopted. Maybe I shouldn't say anything at all, even if it offends my sensibilities.
Even if this person were adopted, I'd say that, like, sure, they can have their opinion, but they're just wrong. I mean, this
That's
doesn't
true.
add anything,
There
you
is,
know?
I would say probably about around, I don't know, a third to half of adoptees feel this way, whether it's a genuine feeling or a feeling out of social pressure.
I like this reply. Hey, if anyone knows of a pregnant woman who is unable to keep her own child because of the extremely tragic position she's found herself in, we'd like to participate in her trauma by taking her baby from her. Please think of us before you think of her.
Yeah,
That's basically what it is, right? And there'll always be someone like this guy who's like, don't speak for everyone. Who's like, oh no, there's somebody who can do it, but they don't want to, so they just that is such a vanishingly small percentage of women. Um, that it's not even worth really talking about.
exactly. Treating the outliers as if it proves the opposite point of
Or
what other people are
justifies
making.
the whole system, right?
Yep.
Justifies how the current status quo works.
And I think of both of us, right? And I think of like our educational attainment. I think of the fact that we're both married. I think of the fact that we have good relationships with our parents. That I think our individual lives speak to some of the best case scenarios you can really expect out of adoption. I mean, we're alive for one, up to the age that we're at. And, I guess knowing what I know and knowing the dark history of adoption and knowing the things that the sort of emotional turmoil that I had to go through to get to the point where I'm at, thankfully that was surmountable for me.
Right.
But just because overall adoption may have been like a net positive for my case, I can think of I can think of 10 for every I can think of 10 bad for every good scenario that's
Right.
come out of adoption. And, I don't want to use my own positive experiences to offset the number of bad experiences that are absolutely egregious with abuse or neglect that I've heard
Right.
about.
Right.
So my position really comes from this perspective of, I mean, I dealt with a lot of shit and it wasn't good, But if we can really only expect worse and not really expect better than that, then why does this system exist as it is for as long as it's
Right.
existed? We got to start asking some questions.
Right. And it sort of like relates to the debate that's going on with the most recent Mr. Beast stunt that he did, where he paid for um, 1,000 people to get their blindness cured because I guess they have a curable blindness, but
Yeah,
the treatments are incredibly expensive, so people just sort of linger with it.
yeah,
And he paid. It was like I read somewhere there was like five thousand
yeah. five
dollars
thousand per
per
eye.
eye.
Yeah,
So each person was like it was $10,000,000, $10,000, and he
yeah,
did 1,000 people. So what, 10,000,000 or something more than that? Yeah, 10,000,000 or something like that.
yeah. Three zeros to the 10,000. Yeah, ten
Yeah,
million.
and so people are like, why are people angry that he did this? And
That misses the
it
fucking point.
right. So it's the same reason why all those like sort of feel good stories where it's like uh person discovers that neighbor secretly was paying for their medicine for years, right? It's like, yes, that was a very nice thing for that person to do. Very cool, I guess, that Mr. Beast did what he did, right? I mean, it's not bad that 1,000 more people got their treatments and can now see than there were previously, right? It's that you have to ask, like, why did he have to do it?
Yeah,
Right? Like, why is the system the way it is? Like, why is that the option? So, like, when someone is like, what if it's this shit Jake says, or a can of Diet Coke 12 was like, what if someone who's give birth when they couldn't raise the child and chooses to adopt out the baby, provide a loving home for said child? Where's the harm in that situation? Would you prefer the child to exist in unstable conditions with their birth parents or an orphanage?
yes, I
In my
would prefer that they be in an orphanage and unstable conditions because
yeah,
that's the kind of shit I believe in.
yeah, I mean, and it's like, well, they don't have much of an imagination. It's like, well, why couldn't we help the parents to be in a stable situation, right? Um, and and this idea of a loving home, um, there are a lot of people like love that I think a birth family, like birth mom and a birth father, have for the child that they lost or had to give up or relinquish or for whatever reason weren't able to raise. That love doesn't like fade, right? So like there's this idea, I think because a lot of people are aware, I think maybe subconsciously they're aware that there's like it's not an ideal situation. There's probably going to be a lot of hurt and trauma and um, both for the child and for the people who had and the birth parents. So in their head, they have to sort of concoct this notion that the home wasn't loving. Don't you want the child to have a loving home? And it wasn't obviously the one that gave him up. So the one that wanted him, right? The one that
Yeah,
took him, they're the loving home, right? Because you only take a child in if you're gonna love them, if it's a loving home. So that they concoct this myth that
yep,
like every home that a child came from in an adoption scenario was not a loving one, right? And yes, and it was completely unstable. And that somehow is like an immutable fact that like
yep,
it, it being unstable was just sort of the state of nature, it could never change. And you know, and I'm like, people, why do people think that way? And I think it's because they just have to. If they didn't, then they would have to. They would have to confront the really, really complex and not so pleasant reality of our system, right? Because
yeah,
we've talked about before, like when you look at the former, like the foster the population of people who are in foster care, right, in America.
hmm,
Um, a lot of like 50% of people who are in foster care, um, or more, depending, maybe a little bit lower, a little bit higher, depending. It fluctuates, but like 50% of people who have ever been in the foster care system, and for not even that long, like maybe a few months to obviously some people are in it for a very long time
yep.
until they're 18, and then the government's like, get out of here.
Get out of here.
50% of people who are in the foster care system were become homeless for
Yep.
some amount of time in their life. And if you go to any and sort of, and it works like the opposite way too. Like when you look at the homeless situation, if you go to like, if you analyze the homeless population,
Mm,
like 50% of them were in foster care at some point in their life, right?
yep.
That doesn't seem, for a system that's ostensibly trying to help people
It's a
and
very
supposed to be
high
better, the
proportion.
better option, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem great because that's much, much, much higher than the general population, even controlling for, even when looking just at like the, you know, people in poverty, right? And people who are sort of in that functional poverty realm or barely functional poverty realm, like barely above or like close to the poverty line, right?
Mhm.
It's way higher than that. So it's like, are we helping?
No, exactly. I see it similar to, say, the war in Afghanistan, and the idea that the good that came out of the war in Afghanistan was it fought for women's rights, because the Taliban was so repressive. And it's just like you've spun up this narrative as the best case ideal scenario that could have possibly happened to make you feel better about what's actually happening
Mhm.
in reality. But the fact of the matter is, if these statistics of homelessness or things like that are that high among people that have been in the foster care system, it speaks to a much more complicated reality than the stories that we tell ourselves to feel better as outsiders who don't really know how complicated and ugly the situation can get.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
It's not good.
so I just there just seems to be no, what's funny is that like hopefully Mr. Beast's audience will sort of come back around, or somehow like find their way to sort of you know Medicare for all or universal health care. Um, I'm not hopeful because he's done a lot of other sort of stunts about like environmentalism and all that stuff, and it just doesn't. He's just one random fairly rich dude, not that even that rich.
Yeah.
Um, so you know, it is what it is. It's just people, yeah. And it just, people have this like, they have to believe that there's just this, they have to believe the system is working in order to sort of not just like be in despair about how broken it really is. Because
Yeah.
also it's like, what's the real solution, right? People don't. Everyone is sort of just doing their own thing, right? I mean, even if you're like fairly well off, like you've got to keep working and things to like keep yourself there. So like there isn't necessarily a lot of bandwidth for a lot of people to be like, well, okay, this is really bad. What can I do? Can I give up
No,
part of my
exactly.
time to like help this out? Like it just doesn't seem to be right. So it's like, they gotta. A lot of people just believe in these myths so that like they can, I guess, go about their day, but it really doesn't help. And it enables couples like this and others, right? No matter who you are, right? No matter whether you're, uh, gay, not gay, whatever, continue to advertise, and they'll find a baby, right? They'll get one, um,
Eventually, yeah.
you know. And I also wonder like why aren't they going for like surrogacy? Like why don't they use like some of their sperm and they're egg donors, they're egg banks, right? Like
Yeah.
you can there aren't just sperm banks. They're you can go browse through a book of, you
Yeah,
know,
I know a few gay couples personally that in order to have kids, they went through the surrogacy process.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, I don't know any real life gay couples personally that have gone through the adoption process, or else we would have had a major discussion.
Yeah. Um so I just don't, I don't know because it's one thing if they were going to say like, oh, we are aware of all the various complications, and we're also aware of like how foster care shouldn't be seen as sort of a cheap adoption agency, right? Because foster care is ostensibly with the goal of reunification
Yep.
with the families, and so it's like, well, maybe we'll just be foster parents, right? Which is incredibly tough work, right? Um,
Yeah,
But
especially
no,
to do
but
it
they
in a
don't want to do that.
non-abusive way.
Yeah, but people don't want to do that because they there's no certainty that
Yep.
any child that you're placed with, because the job description is you're just temporary, you're a temporary caregiver,
Yep.
and so people don't want that, right? They want sort of the certainty that if I'm going to be investing all this time and money and emotional energy, like this child is mine, right? And people don't talk about the possessive part of this, but it's about possessing them and having
Absolutely.
power over them and having this, like, you know, literally, like, they legally are yours, right? And people don't talk about that aspect of it enough. Where it because it's ugly, right? People don't want to be like, oh, I don't want to foster because, you know, they're not really mine, right?
Yeah.
Um, they just don't talk about it at all, or they're like, oh no, it'll be really tough. I don't know if I can manage the child. So it's probably best if if I'm not prepared for that, then I don't, I don't be a foster child. I'm like, and in that I agree. If you if you don't feel like you're up to it and be prepared for like how tough it is, then yeah, do not be a foster parent.
I can respect that,
I can respect
recognizing your
that.
own limits.
Yeah. So that's fine. But I think a big part of it is that people just, they're like, you know what? They're not really going to be mine, and let's be honest, like, I just won't treat them as well. They just won't be mine. I won't care.
Yeah.
I won't put as much effort. And yeah,
Not getting that return on my investment of effort.
yeah. So I hate that forever home bullshit. Like, that's for a
That's for
dog
dogs.
and or a cat. And let's be honest, how many fucking people return their pets too?
No, exactly.
So all that forever home is, that's all bullshit. All right.
Yeah,
Like
that's just something you say in the moment to sound better than you actually are as a human being.
I don't even know what that means anymore. Like, it's just
And I guess when I think about what issues I have with this sort of adoption, I guess regardless of the couple is gay, straight, whatever,
yeah.
is the idea that because of someone's class position or perceived class position,
Yeah.
that society at large feels that they are more deserving to be in possession of a child in comparison to someone that's poor or someone that's from an impoverished area. It just speaks to just general dynamics to how things work in the United States as it relates to who's deserving of nice things and who's not. And I think with these sorts of photos that they've taken, the fact that they own their own house in a suburban neighborhood in Arizona is speaking to all the sort of class signifiers that makes the average suburban white person say, "Hey, this couple looks deserving to have someone else's baby. They look stable enough. They must be a good character. They must have nice jobs, and therefore are good people." And I just think it goes back to assumptions that we generally make culturally based on class in a culture that doesn't really talk about class, especially in regards to
Yeah.
how to solve problems in society.
I yeah. Yeah. Class is never that's the other, that's the other elephant in the room no one wants to acknowledge, right?
Yeah, because really the answer to addressing the worst problems as it relates to the kinds of things that these children deal with, the ones that are candidates for adoption, or single mothers thinking of relinquishing custody of their children, the only major solution that can be suggested that actually does something with a high level of confidence is going to be some form of wealth redistribution. And no one likes talking about that. That's the ultimate taboo in American culture and English discourse. So, you start going toward that, and people don't want to talk about what the solutions would be anymore. But they have no problem recognizing the problems.
Right. Right. You know what I also love the hypocrisy of these people is that they're like, since all they want to talk about is lived experience and how you have to talk from lived experience, and your lived experiences are like are the highest form of evidence for any of your opinions, except when that lived experience contradicts or makes what their desires harder.
Goes against the grain.
Yeah. So since many want to use their experience, so their lived experience, to color the adoption process, let me just say this: your experience is yours, no one else's, except when you want to use your own experience to bully everyone else.
Yep.
Not every adoption is ripping a child away from a home. This I've experienced with and have held a grudge for the birth mother for years. So I had to read this a few times to sort of try to parse what this person is saying. But I think
Yeah.
what they're saying is that they might have, or maybe someone else in their life, tried to adopt, but then the birth mother changed their mind
Hmm.
and decided to keep their child. And this person experienced that as ripping the child away from a home, their
My
home,
home.
when the child wasn't yours. Um,
Yeah.
and then I get someone responded, and this account doesn't exist anymore. This isn't the case for every adoption, which is the point.
We could
Uh,
say that about fucking anything.
yeah. So
This
like
isn't the
not
case for any particular phenomenon.
right, and this goes back to like they look for the one exception case that will support them, and then use that to invalidate, the vast majority of reality, right? Like you
Absolutely.
said. And it's like not every adoption is ripping a child away from a home. I would beg to differ. It is.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
how many adoptions do you hear of where the adopted child has regular contact with their birth family? Uh, I mean, even in cases where the adopted child seeks out their natural family, that in itself is pretty rare, let alone like someone that has like full permission and blessing of their adoptive parents while they're still children.
right.
So,
And they set up this sort of absurd fictional scenario, straw man scenario of like, because they use the wording ripping a child away from home. Like what people are talking about in the thread like literally means like, yes, we think that every adoption is the scenario where like the child is literally being taken from the birth mother's arms, like ripping them out of or like being dragged from the home by the cops or something, right? Like that's
the
that's
image in my
obviously
mind is
not what
like
is meant by this,
the
right?
image in my mind is like during the Elian Gonzalez
Right.
controversy way back in like 2000, and like the federal agents like pulled him from like a closet from his like aunt's arms sort of
Right.
thing. And that's never the case
Right. And that's not what people are
99.9% of the time.
right. And that's not what people mean by, or the people who are critical of the process mean by like
Yeah,
sort of, you know, adoption being trauma and children being taken away from the home, right? So like, yeah, taking him at gunpoint, right? Like that.
yeah.
But they have to twist it. They have to sort of be like, this is absurd. Do you mean this? And you're like, of course, that's not what we mean.
Not what I'm fucking talking about.
And this idea, and I get, and there are a lot of articles like this. Like you can just look it up, and people are like, oh, hopeful adoptive family devastated by how long this is taking, blah blah blah, and they're like, I can't believe that the birth parents are done. I'm like, think about it. If you had a child and you're going through this decision about what you needed to do, and maybe in a moment of weakness or severe fear and anxiety and uncertainty, you made a decision that, I'm going to do this. I'm going to give my child up. It's for the best. It's for the best. And then, and maybe you stick by the decision for a while, but it's not like final yet. And then at some point in the future, you're like, you know what? I changed my mind. And then, but they don't put themselves in those shoes to be like, maybe think about what if I was on the other side of this and how
Yeah,
hard that would be. They're only thinking about it from like, I wanted this child and it was mine in my head, right? It was mine in my heart. and now it's being ripped from me. So I'm actually the one that was the most aggrieved.
Yeah.
I'm the one who ripped the family. I'm the one who's having their child ripped away from me. Not
Mm-hmm.
not potentially the person who gave birth to the fucking kid, right?
Yeah. Or the kid.
Like, so it's like they have to they have to be the ones who are the victim. They're the ones who had done wrong. Something was done to them. They were wrong. And I find that incredibly. Um, I find that to be just horrible. Like it's almost ghoulish.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I think it's emotionally immature enough to make the case that you should have never had children in your possession and contact in the first place. You weren't
yeah,
ready for it.
yeah. Um, like yes, absolutely. Uh, you might you can it's I can understand from a certain perspective of like you really if you really wanted to have a child and you got emotionally connected maybe to this particular child because of how this the process works where you nowadays where like you probably meet the kid maybe you meet the child or maybe you've had interactions with the birth mother because a lot of these people get matched before the child is born, right? So they're
Yep.
literally like following along, like waiting for the for the birth to happen, right?
So we can take that baby.
Right.
Yep.
And a lot of times they do give money, right? They pay for the treatment and the doctors and all that stuff. Um, but I can understand from it, trying to put myself in their shoes to be like, you're basically you're like you're emotionally connecting, right? And then if the birth mother changes their mind, then I can understand how that's a big letdown and you'd be very upset and it would be emotionally very trying. But it's the child still wasn't yours.
Yeah. It
Um,
speaks to how high the emotional stakes were in the first place.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. If like you were, if as the hopeful adoptive parent, you were that emotionally invested, think about the birth mother.
Yeah, did you have any empathy at all built into your expectations?
Right. So, and this all goes, this goes back to the idea of like entitlements and the, feeling of who deserves, right? Because that's also a conversation that people don't have, right? It's like
Yeah.
this idea of like who deserves, who's worthy of, raising these human beings, right? These children. Um, and oftentimes it's not the poor people, it's not the people of color, or it's not. Yeah, it's not. It's always someone who's of it's always a class. You're saying class, right?
Yep. And just a general perception of how similar they are to the hegemonic majority. Like, are they Christian? Do they
Yeah.
exhibit Christian values? Oh, they're American, so they're a member of the most prosperous society in the world. So by default, if a child is coming from internationally, they're going to be better off than if they stayed in their savage home country. So, all these things speak to a notion of how deserving people are on the basis of similarity in culture and class. And I think even the tendency of Americans to aspirationally identify with the powerful, not because they actually genuinely feel like connected to those people, but because they are coping with the fact that they are not in reality a member of that social class. But
Hmm.
by sort of caping for these people, they feel closer to that status.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to me, that's just goofy shit. Like, that's like defending Elon Musk on Twitter in
Yeah.
hopes that, you eventually make $1 billion.
Notice me, senpai.
No, exactly. It's that sort of shit. And I think, ass kissing and ingratiating yourself to the powerful exists anywhere. But I think there is a specific sort of strain of that in American culture where a disproportionately large amount of people operate that way. And we live in a society where it's very unlikely you'll be able to make class advancements like that. because I saw a tweet earlier today where it was someone's series of name tags because they
Oh
worked at
yes, I saw that.
McDonald's
Yeah,
and they started off as a crew member and they eventually made it up to like franchise owner or something like that.
franchisee. Yeah, with
Yeah,
owning a
and
franchise. Yeah,
exactly. And, you know, that may have been the case 40 years ago. That level of mobility uh, and the ability to advance within one particular organization, but that does not fucking exist anymore. Any advancement that I've had has been related to getting a clean slate at a new place that doesn't know any of my previous history. And I mean,
yeah.
just having experienced that myself, I know not to have that level of divine faith in uh, people of like the business owning class to notice me and promote me. I mean,
I mean, even but like, yeah, in the more corporate context, right? I agree. Um, yeah, and the original post said, yeah, this doesn't
yeah,
happen
it
anymore.
doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, and in the corporate context, I agree, right? I mean, the chances of someone starting as like even if you don't start like as a second, always like the meme or like the myth is that like, you start as a secretary and then suddenly and you retire as CEO. Even if like let's say you start like not as like the secretary, but you're just like a junior associate somewhere, right?
Yeah,
The chances that you're going to end up as like a C-suite employee within
yeah,
that
like an
same
EVP.
organization
Yeah,
is infinitesimally small. Like
absolutely.
the
It's
only way
much
you're
more
going to,
likely that like some 23-year-old consultant is going to be vice president over you as a 40-year-old like mid-level individual associate.
yeah. And like the only way in the corporate world really that you move up the ladder, right? Is you might get like one or two promotions within an organization,
Yep.
but a lot of times that's sort of where you tap out. Or
Yep.
I think in the tweet thread they say tap or cap or you cap out.
Yep.
Is that you have to go to another company and you might either you do a lateral move and then hope that there's room there to go up more, or you get a promotion by moving,
Yep.
right? And maybe yeah, so like in the corporate world, that's never almost never been a reality, right? And again, like they trot out like the one or two examples of it. It's like, oh yeah, so it happened to like one person. Why not everyone, right?
My uncle
Dumb,
did that once.
dumb.
Yeah.
And then in maybe if you had started out as like just I don't know a line cook or something at McDonald's 40 years ago because of like McDonald's are all franchises, right? So maybe if you had gone up that ladder, like as the salary goes up, and maybe if you're really smart with saving money, or maybe you meet someone who owns a franchise and they really like you, so they help you buy. There might be a way, and maybe if you had gotten like started early enough and the franchises were not as expensive relative to sort of how much money
Back
you're
when
making,
houses were like $30,000.
you might have been able to do it.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to start out now, like we can look up like average McDonald's franchise cost.
I'm gonna say 300,000 starting capital, 500,000 liquid.
All right. So according to Investopedia,
Yeah.
great site by the way. Investopedia is a great site for doing sort of uh, explaining basic investing and business terminology, and they give concrete examples, like simple concrete examples.
And
So
you know
you can
what?
look up
I'm
almost
looking
anything.
right at the highlighted result,
Yeah,
and I had a pretty damn good guess.
yeah. Let's see. In other words, many chosen make a living under the shadow of the ubiquitous golden arches. McDonald's is a popular brand with many stores, earn well over 2 million in sales annually. Um, Okay.
Yeah, 1.3
However,
to
prospective
2.3
franchise
million.
owners are well advised to get their financial ducks in a row before applying to launch a new McDonald's franchise or buy an existing restaurant. The cost of purchasing an existing franchise can reach 1 million or more, and
Yeah.
a new operation will cost between 1.3 and 2.4 million dollars. So McDonald's franchisee applicants must have a minimum of five. You're right, 500 available in liquid assets and pay a $45,000 franchise
You
fee.
need to be rich already.
Those
That's
looking
like
to yeah,
intergenerational wealth.
or be or or be able to get a loan for that,
That is true.
which would take, I don't know how many people would qualify for a $500,000
I don't even
business
know
loan.
because I'm thinking about like even the amount of like people that get approved for educational loans
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
like that's owed no matter what. Like that's still pretty tough. I mean, you need to provide all sorts of proof of like the expenses itemized from the particular school that approved for that loan, let alone something that's more of a business loan. Like that's
Hmm.
got to be virtually impossible to be approved for.
Oh my God. It's non-borrowed personal resources.
Wow. So that's just got to be straight liquid in your account.
Yeah. So you can't get like a bank loan and say, this is how, wow.
Wow.
Um, so they must, they can borrow the remaining money. The amount of, okay. So prospective buyers have 25% of the purchase price of an existing franchise in non-borrowed cash. Um, so it costs a lot. So, I wonder though, in that, like, from that viral tweet, right? Um, maybe we can find it, right?
I think I have it bookmarked. I'm going to
You have a
check real
bookmark?
quick.
Is that maybe they just sort of, I don't know, how could, I'm just trying to think, like, does a does a McDonald's manager make that?
You know, I think McDonald's managers, a general manager would make like 50, 60K. That's my guess. And I found the tweet too.
No way. McDonald's manager makes 33 to 70K per year, according to Glassdoor.
Yep. That sounds about right. Because it's one of those things where like I know people that aren't well off that have been managers of fast food franchises for a
Okay, maybe general manager, 53,000.
that's rough.
What what was, because they had the tweet and they were like, 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 how frugally must you be living to earn, even if it's 70K, it would be impossible within anyone's reasonable lifetime. Not impossible, but extremely hard, almost impossible, I
Extremely
think.
difficult.
Extremely difficult to just save your way to have enough money based on how much they say it costs.
Yeah, because like I'm thinking about my first job out of college, and I was making about $17 an hour, which came out to about like 34,000 before taxes, give or take. And I was incredibly frugal for that 2 or so years, like buying only chicken legs and chicken thighs on sale and cooking them in the crock pot and like spending like $60 per week on food, uh, just so I could move down with my then girlfriend, now wife.
Hmm.
And even then, like I only saved $20,000 in those 2 years. And that was me being incredibly frugal and me never going out and just really trying to save. And, you know, I'm just thinking about, okay, 20,000 over 2 years. I tried to do that and make 500,000. I'd have to be that frugal over a period of at least 20 plus years to make that minimum liquid starting capital amount for a McDonald's franchise.
Crazy.
That's crazy, man. And like I was able to save that much because it was 10 years ago. It was before the inflation
Yeah.
that we saw in the last 2 years. If I was making that same amount of money and trying to do the exact same thing, I'd probably save like 3,000 out of that 20.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, yeah, but this person, if you can find the tweet, like they weren't saying they did this like before. They were
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, we finally got the franchisee." Like now. So
Yeah, I have it right here actually.
yeah,
So I'm gonna scroll up and yeah, this sort of career growth is no longer available to you. You're capped about halfway up now, which would put
can
you at
you s-
like
can
a
you just
manager or
can
assistant
you zoom in a
manager.
little bit?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And then yeah, just scroll down. What I find funny is that it goes. So I presumably it's the from starts from the bottom, right?
Yeah.
There's manager, then first assistant. So I'm like, wait, how is first assistant above manager?
I think this might be like shift manager, and then it's like
First
assistant general
assistant?
manager,
Yeah, probably like assistant
something
general
like that.
manager, and then restaurant manager,
Yep.
and then supervisor, and then licensee. So licensee isn't franchisee. That's just licensee.
I'm not sure. I mean,
I
it
thought it
may
was.
be a franchisee because it looks like this is from Australia, so they could come up with all kinds of weird
Oh,
terminology for what
maybe,
they mean.
yeah. You know what I also find hilarious is that
What?
that the tags get smaller as the
Yeah.
years go by,
Yeah.
and the position, like they're cutting costs on the plastic for the.
No, exactly.
um,
Over that course of 20 years, they're using like one third the amount of plastic from the original.
I also like the I kind of like the color scheme of like the green and the white, the old
Yeah,
one. But
it stands out.
my favorite logo or favorite nameplate is probably if you scroll up
Yeah.
is probably the one that says like first assistant. Like I like the golden arch thing and I like the size of it.
Yeah.
It's not too big, not too small. But then look at the new ones. It's like this could be any fucking company. There's no
Yeah.
color. It's all black.
Yep. Speaks to the trends in flat graphics that we like today. I do plenty of that shit today. And
Yeah, and I
it's
like
pretty
how it was
bland in comparison.
yeah. But anyway, I don't know. We've strayed far from the original topic, but
But it speaks to class mobility and
yes.
opportunities that natural parents are much less likely to have than the people adopting children.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just find it funny that one of the uh one of the reasons that's trotted out by the defenders of the system is that well, and it's something I think that we can also probably sort of admit to ourselves as adoptees is that it's probably true that we got more quote unquote opportunity because of where we were adopted than if we had stayed in Korea. Um, though it's not quite a slam dunk case because even throughout like the early '80s and into the '90s, like Korea was, and the education system and such was pretty good, right?
Mhm.
Um, it would have just been a different experience, better in some ways, worse in other ways.
Yep.
And certainly class still would have been a factor, right? Because I think that probably we would have not, certainly in my case, um, I was definitely adopted into a much more upper middle class family than my birth family. But the reason why it's sort of like the ends justify the means reason that's given for adoption is it's just good is that well the person you're adopted into a family that can give you more opportunity. You're in a
Yeah.
better situation, and I'm like, well, there's always someone with a better situation than you. So
Absolutely.
why should you get the kid? Why don't we just give it to someone who's super
There's
wealthy?
always someone that has more and that has more ability to provide.
Uh, um, if you had your own children, like, if your parents, gave birth to a child, like, why didn't their kid just be taken from them? Because, you know, compared to someone else, they're
because they
poor.
couldn't afford a Ferrari.
Yeah. So like that reasoning doesn't hold up for me. I'm like,
Yeah,
that doesn't mean that we should just because we should just take it to the logical conclusion. We should just shuffle all the babies around then,
yeah.
right? But we don't do that. We don't do that.
Just to see what happens, you know?
Yeah. But we don't do that obviously because I think that if it was someone who is just like, a wine mom and a golf dad,
Yep,
right? A wine mom and a whiskey dad, right? In the suburbs, who presumably have enough resources to raise children well or well enough. If we just were like, no, they can't. You're not able to send your kid to the best private school.
yeah,
You're not fit. We're going to take your children and to give them to someone else because they have a much bigger house and they can afford all, the most expensive everything. People would be like, that's absurd. We can't do that. That's awful. But when you talk about poor people, that's seen as, oh yeah, of course, just take their kids, right? They don't deserve them.
yep.
Um, so that just doesn't make any sense to me, especially since like we spend all this money to fund, these government organizations and also, the private adoption or agencies charge all this money for their services. That money could be spent elsewhere.
Elsewhere,
So
like assisting the families that are giving up their kids for adoption in the
yeah,
first place.
because a lot of the time it's literally we just don't have the resources to be able to raise the children well, right? And it's not about not having love, right? It's that they're not a loving home. um they're not abusive in the sort of caricature way of like, oh, every kid who's taken from their home and is put in foster care is like, obviously their parents are just all drug addicts and physically and sexually abusive, and they were just monsters,
Yeah, haven't you read that book, A Child Called
right?
It?
Yeah. So like, certainly we can't give them money, they won't know what to do with it. um so we'll just we'll give money, we'll give money to organizations so they can, you know find suitable homes, and it's just all it's all gross.
Yeah, it speaks to constantly moving goalposts where there's no real, I guess, consistent reason that would justify this amount of displacement,
Yeah.
uh, and eventually having children being emotionally damaged by this whole process. And I certainly don't think that I'm excluded from that either. And I think my shit's pretty good, but it didn't come easy.
No. No.
But yeah, I mean, I guess when it comes to this topic of like this gay couple putting up a post advertising for and hoping for a pregnant woman to inquire, hopefully allowing her child to be given up for adoption. I guess, I see it as my responsibility to be like, hey, I had a pretty good experience. I'm not going to deny that. I'm not going to lie about the experiences that I had. But I think it's my duty as someone that's perceived to be credible.
Mm-hmm.
Because, there are a lot of adoptee cranks on Twitter that make their
Yeah.
entire online presence to be these tragic portrayals of how everything's gone wrong in their life. And, that may be the case. I can't really confirm or deny that someone's life is going to be like that because I've heard plenty of things where that sort of thing could be substantiated. But if you are constantly presenting yourself and your perspective and your experiences like that, we live in a culture where if you've got anything negative to say, if you're pointing anything negative out, people are going to attack your credibility. But for me, as someone that is married, someone that is a member of the middle class, someone that has like college degrees from
Mm-hmm.
respected institutions, like I see it as my responsibility to share my thoughts to be, hey, I may have had a good experience, but I've heard of plenty of others from people that I trust
Right.
that make this institution worth examining more critically.
Right.
And I think with any sort of respect that I've been granted from society on the basis of the sort of success that I've been able to have on an individual basis, that I need to. It is my obligation to add some credibility to the people that may immediately be dismissed because of the first impression that they leave.
Right.
And, you know, I look at this couple and, you know, they seem like, you know, as a couple, they get along well. They seem
I have
economically well off.
I don't have anything against them
Yeah,
personally or
yeah,
about who they are or being like I think that they're secret whatever. It has
yeah.
nothing to do with that.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I just think that their ability to go online and post something like this and promote the post and look specifically for pregnant women who are willing to give up their babies, that it speaks to a general sense within themselves, whether they acknowledge it or not, whether it's explicit or whether it's subconscious, that they believe they are deserving of something that they want, that another person who has that is less deserving. And so let's just go forward with this process to make sure we get what we want.
Yeah, and they'll not even think about that pregnant woman is less deserving. They don't
Yeah,
even think about it.
yeah.
It's like we're deserving, and we're doing a nice thing. Come on, we have this
And
great life.
and that's how conversation about this stuff gets shut down. It's
Yeah,
from the perspective of thinking about the most ideal situation and combining it with the intention of the people that we give more respect, the people that are
right.
going to be adopting children, and saying, hey, we shouldn't question them. They have good intentions and they're doing the right thing. Therefore, we shouldn't be talking about this at all because it is insulting and it is.
Are you homophobic?
No,
Like, do you hate
exactly.
gay people? Is that why you
Exactly.
don't want them to adopt? It's like,
It's there's always some sort of straw man argument that's put up related to something that's usually related to identity, that, you know, there's plenty of bias towards certain groups of people that my particular arguments against have nothing to do with. Like,
yeah,
you're taking things that I don't even particularly care about and adding it to a case to refute what I'm trying to say. And it's just
yeah,
because it's taboo to, I guess, criticize people of certain identities, depending on the context, that I'm
certainly,
doing
yeah,
any attacking of that identity. The
right,
identity has nothing to do with it. That's
yeah,
just a, a miscellaneous detail in the rest of the situation, which is related to who do we think is more deserving and who ends up with the nice things in this society. And, you know, I look at their website, I look at these posts, and I think, hey, maybe economically they are more capable than a lot of parents out there who are thinking about relinquishing their children. But anything that we've seen, any written evidence, any photos, any things like that, don't really give us any sort of substantial proof of how emotionally capable they are. And I think by even posting this sort of request of like, hey, we're looking for mothers who are looking to give up their children, speaks to a certain level of like lacking self-awareness, where I just wouldn't trust them from the beginning. Like,
yeah,
if you
yeah.
had any sort of sense of humility or any sense of empathy, you wouldn't be asking in this way.
Oh, yeah, and I think it's just become such a normal part of the whole process of adopting for a certain certain class of person, right? Upper middle class, sort of professional managerial class type of person that they don't, and it's been pushed by the agencies too, and I think also by like independent sort of baby brokers or birth parent searchers, because there are people whose jobs are to pair HAPS, which is the acronym that's used for hopeful adoptive parents,
Mhm.
with birth mothers. Um, and a lot of times the birth mothers aren't even looking to be quote unquote birth mothers. They're just, I guess, just women that happen to get pregnant.
Mhm.
But they're, I mean, there are birth mother searchers who probably like stalk the maternity wards or stalk
Yeah,
the
looking
fucking
for slightly
OBGYN
unfortunate
offices and
mothers.
shit.
Yeah.
And they'll just, I so it's it's there's this ecosystem of how like these sort of websites and these advertisements are the norm for how a certain class of person in American society goes about doing this.
Yep.
And to them it's normal, right? To this couple, this is what they're told by reputable organizations or whatever, or people who are experts in this. This is what you do. And these are the elements you touch on, all this stuff. Um yeah, so it's the whole ecosystem, the whole society, like the environment has been warped. Um yeah, we can't criticize systems and institutions in this country without reactionaries individualizing it. Yeah, absolutely.
That is the number one way collectively that we prevent any sort of progress as it relates to long-standing, long-term issues that have been things we've discussed for a long period of time, is by saying, oh, the system itself is fine, it can be improved, and really we're going to focus more on the results and efforts of individuals to justify these bad systems. And I mean, I guess over the course of our lifetimes, not much has really changed in terms of how adoptive parents operate or how agencies operate. What's really made any sort of improvement to these systems at all is related to governments from, say, international, I guess, host countries that have these children being like, there's some kind of fucked up shit going on with these kids. Maybe we should cut off this supply of babies to this place where kids are getting fucked up. So, yeah, I think the proof speaks in terms of the changes that have been made systemically or at a large scale have made the most difference in comparison to the efforts or the lessons learned from individuals acting in this system. So, absolutely.
Yeah. My new job has really emphasized that separating a kid from their parents is one of the worst things you can do, if not the worst. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Um, even if the parent-child relationship is really fraught and like really bad in a lot of ways, um, it is traumatic. You know, even if it's probably the best thing to do sometimes, right? I mean, there are situations where it's you know you just got to get the kid away because it is dangerous.
yep,
But even in those situations, a lot of kids don't want to be separated.
yeah,
Um, so just think about even like, situations that are not that extreme. How 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 bad that is.
yeah. And
Um,
there's something to the idea of there's something about familial love that you can't quantify or you can't measure. And there are plenty of ways things are justified in adoption through the lens of how much money people make or the means that they have to provide for a child. But we don't have any sort of way of really definitively saying that emotionally or culturally, people are more equipped or more ready to raise these kids than their own parents. So I think it just really speaks to more questions being raised about why we do this in the first place than speaking
mhm.
to any sort of particular reason why we should continue doing it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And so this is also the time, my weekly time
Yes.
to use the bathroom because I've been drinking. So I need you to distract the audience for between 60 and 90 seconds,
All
and I'll be
right.
right back.
Maybe we'll just count and see how long it takes. No,
Yeah, count with the audience and we'll see how long it takes. I'll be right back.
all right, cool. So we're actually going to change. Yeah, I knew it. Well, what is this new job, CS? What is this new job you got? I forget. You probably told me, but I forgot. I'm sorry. I'm a bad friend. Um, no, I'm not a Resident Evil fan. I'm a scaredy cat. I can't deal with the horror games. Um, I can't even watch that many uh horror movies. I know, I know. Um, but yes, but I know Resident Evil 8 is supposed to be good. I know all the Resident Evil games are supposed to be good, but um, yeah, I haven't yet. Um, we're gonna change tack when Call gets back. Are you sure Kyle isn't Vietnamese? Is that what happens? Like a small bladder? Is that what? No, it was no. Your comment was good. We got it. We got it. Oh, public defender's office, parent side of dependency cases. Man, yeah. The God, public defenders are probably some of the least heralded. They make nothing,
Shout
right?
out to them. Yeah, going through
Um,
law school only to get paid like peanuts and get like a huge caseload no one could possibly have a
yeah,
rigorous understanding of.
super low resources too. Um, yeah, the dependency case. Dude, yeah, it is depressing. But like, I read some of these articles about the way our system works when it comes to these dependency cases, right? Or when children are removed from families for reasons of like neglect, um, where the parents are basically just too poor, right? And or maybe like they had one bad incident, but like it isn't systemic, or there's no real evidence for it to being systemic. And the family, like the courts will be like, you need to go to these parenting classes, you need to go to these detox things, you got to do X, Y, and Z. And while that's happening, the child is out of the home, right? So it's in a foster care situation. And sometimes the child's shuttled around to a few of them, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like there's any permanence, right? It's not even like, oh, they're in a much better situation. It could be that they're just being shuttled left, all over the place. And while the parent is sort of dealing with a situation where like, my child was taken from me, or my children, could be plural. They got to try to work and then fit in these parenting classes, right, on an arbitrary schedule, because the schedule is not never like around like the parent schedule. It's always like it's got to be, court mandated.
Yep.
And then even when a lot of these parents do everything they're told to do, they'll come back and the court will be like, no, you got to do more, because they just arbitrarily, like, the case worker or whatever, or the judge just is like, you know what, you got to do more, you didn't convince me yet, so they
The
got to
coin
do
flip.
more. And this is not taking months, it could take years.
Yep.
And then by the time they finally are like convinced that the parent did enough, a lot of times what will happen is that like the foster parent will be like, oh, as soon as it's like almost as soon as or very shortly after they got the kid. This is like assuming that the kid wasn't shuttled around, but let's say they found a place like a more permanent foster family home situation. The foster parents are like, we love this kid so much, we want to adopt them. So like as the parent is doing this sort of all this work to like get their kid back, that's court mandated. Yes, and I was getting to that term, best interest. So what happens then is that like this foster family will apply to, they'll to adopt, and it's sort of running in parallel, right? And then it's possible that like 2 years have gone by, right? 2 years or something like that, and then this parent has gone through all these hoops. It's been years. And they're like, finally, they said that, like, I'm going to get my child back. And then the judge can be like, well, in the best interest of the child, because it's been 2 years and they're used to their family, and this is great foster family, great family. And, they've been going through everything they need to do to adopt. They'll be like, well, for the best interest of the child, we're going to make this foster thing permanent. And this is like people, maybe, I don't know if anyone like, there are enough people who watch this for us to get on the radar of like I don't know, the anti-woke people or the or the pro-adoption people or whatever. And they might cut this out and be like, this crazy anti-adoption,
Angry
baby-hating
adoptees.
guys, these crazy angry adoptees making up the scenario. I'm not making this shit up. Google it. There are articles written in not just local little papers, but in big fucking publications. There are court records. These are documented. This is what happens. I mean, there's studies that this happens. And the system's designed for this shit to happen. The best interests of the child. For the best interests of the child that were taken from the home, right? The best interests of the child that were shuttled around to different foster families, right? For the best interest of the child, we're just going to make it permanent, and they'll never, because they don't know their parent anymore, right? Like, yeah, of course, fucking not. They don't. You, by force of law, kept them away from their parents, and if you're lucky, you get placed with one of your relatives, kin. And I say if you're lucky, because a lot of times, the kin are discriminated against in the process. And they're also incentivized not to place them with kin because the way that our system works, the CPS organizations don't give money, or at least a lot of them didn't used to. Maybe they've changed the laws, but they didn't used to give money, financial support to kin caregivers. So if total stranger foster placement, they get money, right? They get state aid. And because state aid, a lot of it comes from the federal government, and the federal government looks like, oh, how much did you spend of the money we gave you? Oh, you used it all? All right, we're going to keep giving you that amount or give you more. But if you don't use it, they're like, oh, I guess you didn't need it, and they'll get less, right? So you're incentivized to spend the money that you get from the government, even if it's not in the best interest of the child, right? Even if like there's a ready and willing and able and grandparent or brother, sister, aunt, uncle, whoever, they'll be like, well, if you're in a state where they don't get money, then it's not even in the budget or like financial interest of that state organization to place them with the child with that kin, because they're like, well, we won't, we can't show that it was, we gave money to you, and therefore, we're going to have less of a spend, and therefore we're going to get less funding from the federal government and from our state government, right? So that's that perverse incentive,
Yep.
right? And it's different by state, so not every state's like that, but it used to be. I think some states are still like that. Because if you're able to be placed with kin, then, excuse me, and it's less likely, I think, that they're just going to arbitrarily be like, oh, we're just going to adopt your nephew or your niece or whatever, or your grandson or your whatever, right? Like you're just gonna care for them while your relatives go through whatever they need to do to get their kids back. But that just doesn't happen as often, right? But every famous adoptee, right? Like Simone Biles is probably the most famous adoptee in America, but she was adopted by her grandparents.
Yeah.
And so when a lot of like these really famous adoptees are like, are done, at our kinship placements, I think it gives a false impression of like how that usually works. Yeah. So like I didn't know that, but yeah, is number one predictor of a child being expelled from school, more likely than being homeless. Yeah. I mean, a lot of that acting out is because of trauma from the home, right? And from very early childhood experiences. And certainly if like we were talking about earlier, like the number one indicator of whether you're going to become homeless or not probably is whether you were in the foster care system. It's certainly like being expelled from school, like being acting so poorly in school that you get expelled. That doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
Doesn't surprise me at all. And it's got to be much higher than even just, non-adopted, any circumstance, right? Any circumstance. So yeah, no, that'd be great. I mean, if you tweet the citations. I mean, they
I'll bookmark them.
yeah, but it's just whatever we're doing, it's not working. And no one, that's why I feel like everyone who we were replying to that couple or whatever, they'd be like, we were talking about earlier, they'd be like, oh no, they're just trying to do a good thing. I'm like, well, it'd be better if they were to use their soapbox, right? Because they seem to have some amount of following to try to advocate for a better system,
Yeah.
right? But they're not going to do that because that wouldn't immediately or in any way really benefit them, right? Because they wouldn't get a child that they desperately desire, and it would probably lose them some subscribers, because this is probably their only job, right? The podcast, whatever, and maybe the other guy in the couple has an actual job.
Who knows?
So they're not going to do it, and you know, just going to continue on. So one thing we did want to talk about, because this is sort of like a complete just out of the blue thing.
Yep.
Just a
180,
complete
270.
180. We're not talking about the AI boobies, okay?
Okay. That was one of the candidates.
That is one of the candidates. We could talk about that.
Whatever.
But what I do want to talk about now is how angry people are again with Marie Kondo.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, she is just a very pleasant woman. And I know that people were angry at her earlier or a few years ago because she dared to say, maybe you don't need everything in your house. Don't be
Maybe you don't need all that shit.
She said it in a much more Japanese and polite way, but basically she was saying, throw some of your shit out. But not even really that. She was just sort of saying, look at what you got. And if you really hate the fact that your home's messy, maybe just do an inventory of what you have and throw some of it out. Or give it away. Donate it, right? And, in a sense also, it's like, don't be insane about folding, but organize your drawers. It'll help you, right? It won't solve all your problems. She's not Jordan Peterson. But, fold your clothes and help you organize, and it'll make maybe your day easier because you won't be scrambling to like find your socks, when you have to get up in the morning, get dressed to go to work or whatever, right? People freaked out because they're like, this Japanese lady told me to throw away Mima's heirloom. Fucking idiots. But she she admitted that after she gave birth to her third child in 2021, she sort of said her home got a little bit messy, but it's okay because I'm spending more time with my kids. It's more important that, I spend time with my family than I don't have one speck of dust in my house or that every little thing is perfect, right? And which was not something that she wasn't even like advocating for. She wasn't saying that everything had to be perfect, right?
Yeah.
But she was basically just saying, you know what, it's a little messier than I would like, but it's okay, right? And she was sort of giving permission to everyone else, right? It's all right. And she's in a lot of her books, she was saying that too.
Yeah.
But now, the white moms are upset. They're very upset with her. It's like what was this person was like, where's
You know what? I actually think this person said, "Oh, it was a joke."
Yeah, it was a joke, but people took it seriously.
Yeah, because it is a widely shared sentiment
Yeah, they're like,
among white
where's the official
mommy bloggers.
Yeah.
So But I think this speaks to just a larger, more general phenomenon of if someone has any sort of advice for white people and you're not white, you're gonna get fucking chewed out because the last thing that white women want to hear is any sort of advice from anyone that's lower in status, which in this case is just some inscrutable Japanese woman who knows nothing about how difficult lives are for American women and mothers. You know, as if like her experience as a woman isn't mostly applicable to anyone that she's giving advice to.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's certainly a lot of latent, liberal racism in how people were getting upset because I don't think Marie Kondo really reached sort of middle America, or maybe she did. I don't think she was very popular in like maybe conservative circles because they have their own like sort of trad wives and their own sort of
Yeah,
trad
they've got their
culture.
church community to
Yeah,
lean on for that advice.
they have their own sort of like conservative media, parenting advice and household advice people for that. So they don't need her. Um, but I think it was just this liberal racism of like, how dare. And I think also because she's very thin and
There is a certain
attractive and
jealousy and envy to white women when
yeah.
it comes to Asian women. I'll say that straight up.
Yeah, so like I think there's like this little bit of this like how she's so put together. Of course she can do it. Of course she's gonna be
It's
like,
all an act.
how dare her like speak down to me, And I mean, she literally wasn't saying any of that. And uh, she was just saying, be honest with yourself. And I'm like, don't tell an American to be honest with themselves.
Ooh, no.
They don't want that. They don't want to be honest with anyone else, let alone
That's when
themselves.
families fall apart.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and that's an interesting point, right? Like materialism in the American sense means basically just accumulation of material things, right? Materialism, that's sort of like how I think if you were to ask a random American on the street, what does materialism mean to you? You would probably get a lot of answers of that just means like that we like to buy stuff, right? We like stuff, accumulating lots of things. But that doesn't necessarily have to be what materialism is about, right? It could be that you value objects, right? And that because you value them, you maybe have fewer of them, right? Because you're very picky and exacting, and everything that you have must have a purpose. Like there are different ways of being materialistic, right? Um, because I think materialism and consumerism are sort of conflated, right? I think
Yep.
consumerism is much more pretty much can only be seen as sort of like consuming a lot, right? Buying a lot of things, that disposability culture. But like you can be materialistic and basically just sort of value a few things in your life, right? Or have fixation on form and function and all that stuff. So yes, you could. I agree. Like you could say that um, Marie Kondo's was being materialistic, but her philosophy of materialism, like CS is saying, is just anti the American version of it. And that that pisses people off too. And then like I wasn't as aware of her sort of tidying stuff about like you should how to fold stuff and things like that.
Mhm.
But someone replied, they're like when like Martha Stewart is like she's a billionaire on like throwing these like fucking dinner parties that no one's ever gonna throw. Um, much more out of the realm of like possibility. Though maybe it's popular because it's aspirational and Americans love aspirational stuff, even if they're never gonna do any of it or be able to achieve it. They're like, I watched it and I felt better, so that was good or something. But like for Marie Kondo, it was like very much something you could do, right? Like everyone can just pick up what's around them and be like, does this spark joy? No, let's donate it, right? But they didn't like that. I guess people didn't like that.
Yeah, it's too actionable of a suggestion, and it makes people feel guilty about not doing it with the full acknowledgement that it is a lot easier to do things like that and be a little bit more mindful. in comparison to having the lifestyle and making the lifestyle choices of someone like Martha Stewart.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
embarrassing stuff,
Very.
but typical of the things that I observe and criticize in America.
Yeah. And that is not like a foreign concept in America, right? People talk about this like pawns, the what's the like Pawn Stars
Pawn
and
Stars, yeah.
all this like Antiques Roadshow, like people are all about like heirlooms and sentimental value. But I think it's like because like a Japanese woman was telling them they didn't like it. It's not a foreign concept, in America.
Yeah, but I think in the case of Kondo, she's always just saying things that make people feel they don't want to do that extra examining in their life. And I think it's kind of similar to what we're talking about with adoption, sort of like the person that makes people aware of the problem becomes the problem, and they become the sort of like misdirected target of people's frustrations and hangups.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, Funko Pops, like I don't know why people like them so much. Uh, Probably like the most useless and most aesthetically displeasing popular thing that I've seen over the last 10 years. So I
I
don't know,
I
man.
have I have one. It's it's the Batman Funko Pop.
Okay,
Just
well,
because
I think that matches your handle. So
yeah, and my fraternity name so Batman's my thing, but I don't know, as a gift, like it's the only one I have. Um I don't think it's that ugly, but yeah, I don't understand them. Yeah, I don't understand why people go crazy for them.
I'm just glad you didn't like turn your camera only to show that you had like a whole wall of them, and I would have been like, oh shit.
George is like, we're haters.
I'm a born hater. I hate every day.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm just a disappointment, Chris. Um, what did Funko Pops ever do to you?
It made me feel sexually uncomfortable.
they're um they're they're a symptom of obviously they're not the cause of this, but they're cheap plastic and way too expensive for what they are. And it just sort of it's just another example of that type of disposability and cheapness um that pervade and also I'm sort of turning against fan culture now. Like
Oh
the
shit,
idea of
I've been
fandoms.
against that shit since day one. Like,
Yeah.
if there's anything that I've fucking been annoyed by, it's been overly heavy-handed fan culture when I'm just trying to casually enjoy something. Because what eventually happens is like you can't even share just sort of a neutral opinion without it
Right.
becoming some sort of competition as it relates to I know more than you or I'm a bigger fan than you. I don't fucking care. I'm just trying to enjoy things, and you're really messing with my ability to do that. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of my own weaknesses is that I let people ruin things for me. There's plenty of things that I used to like that I don't like anymore because people were too insufferable about it. Anime is definitely one of them. So, yeah, shout out to fan culture and making me recognize things that I hate in life.
So yeah, and I think related related to that in a way is that and just talking about like fan culture and sort of Funko Pops relate to sort of like how cultural objects just can't live on their own anymore. It's sort of like you have to think about all the merchandising and shit that like goes off of that. And how are you going to build that fandom, right? Because you can't, unless you expand the universe outside of whatever um, foundational piece of media or piece of art you've created, then how is a fandom going to grow out of it? And then if you don't have a fandom, then how are you going to continue people to be interested? And then how are you going to continue to make money by making other movies or books or whatever, right? And I think that's that focus on not just the product not just the media you're trying to make, right? The TV show or the video game or the movie or the book you're writing. Um, makes for worse art, right? And so I was reading this article because there's a lot of this, sentiment going around on social media about like Avatar: The Way of Water, right? And they're like, this is the most irrelevant or least influential blockbuster of all time. Like, it's made $2 billion, but like no one cares about it. And I think, and there was an article in Vox today about it. And I think they were not trying to like say this is right or wrong, but sort of just trying to interrogate whether it is right or wrong and maybe sort of why it doesn't seem to have the amount of volume of like posts and and tweets and such about it as like all the Marvel movies and all the Star Wars stuff. And the person wrote that in a sense Avatar is just a standalone movie. Um what was the line here? Yeah, so a lot of that reminding comes from these studios themselves, in large part because their systems designed to never let you forget what's coming next. Each project is part of a larger narrative, and especially in the case of Marvel, those pieces are often crucial to moving the large story forward. Um, they have spin-offs, whatever, and it says
Yep.
what makes Avatar an anomaly is that Disney and the producers of Avatar don't really seem concerned with any of that. Fundamentally, there have only been two movies in the Avatar universe and more than a decade gap between them. Um, it's a wholly original work, sure, parts of it derivative, but there's no comic book, there's no book, there's no other movie, right? It's not based off of anything else. Like he just created it, and the only art that was made was the movie, right? Or the
Yep.
two movies now. Says so much of genre entertainment has evolved to be better suited for fans. But with Avatar, the strange thing is it isn't really built for fandom, and that fandom doesn't really have much to go on beyond the movies.
Yep.
So measuring Avatar against these benchmarks of what we've been trained to see as impact fuels a narrative that Avatar has no cultural impact.
Because there's not other shit around it to consume, and it's
The
not
fact
part of
that
a
yeah,
larger continuity.
and the
Yeah.
fact that we're puzzled points to how difficult it is for our brains to cleave away financial triumph from cultural significance. Things that are financially successful must be culturally powerful, right? What if cultural saturation never was Cameron's goal? And what if, forgive my galaxy brain, the idea of cultural impact is merely a capitalist illusion that studios peddle to ensure their survival? Yes, that's sort of what I'm saying is that they try to feed this fandom so they continue to sell stuff, so they can continue to make a profit, so they can continue to exist, to peddle these products, so they can continue to make money, so they can continue to exist, right? So it's just, but he doesn't seem to care about that. So,
Yeah.
and he continues to make a shit ton of money, right? Like every time he drops it, and it's like that's what it's like. It's impactful because obviously it has a cultural impact because people still remember it, or at least they still remember who James Cameron is, and they probably have some idea of like, oh, this looks pretty good. And here's the thing: it's like a lot of these cultural writers, right, writing for Vox, writing for all these publications, they're online folks, right? So their whole world is what's online, and usually just Twitter.
Yep.
So if it's not being talked about on Twitter in their little bubble of Twitter that they're able to see, then to them it has no impact, right? But the vast majority of people are not on Twitter, and in America, right? And
Yep.
they're not talking to their friends through Twitter about what
Nope.
to see. And even if they're tweeting about it, it's not like their friends are like, oh, I saw, well, normal people, maybe I would, but normal people won't be like, oh, my friend tweeted about how he liked Avatar, so I'm going to go see it, right? What they do is they talk to their friends, right? By text or by phone or by but they have more of a one-on-one thing, right? Yeah, sorry, George. Yeah, I don't know. I'm counting myself in this because I'm also very online. But most people don't, right? So they're like just talking to their friends about it. So when they're just talking to their friend about it, and they're like, "Oh, Jimmy said that, in the office said whatever, like the Avatar was pretty good. I'm gonna go watch it." They don't then tweet about it, so then it doesn't cross the
Yeah.
threshold of consciousness of the people who are studying cultural impact, and they think, "Oh yeah, no one's talking about it." It's like, no one's talking about it on Twitter,
Yeah, if no one posts about it, did it even happen at all?
right? And to me, the continued fact that people are seeing it all the time means that it has some cultural impact, right? And most people aren't in a fandom in the sense that like it's part of their identity and they spend a lot of their time talking about it, right? Or reading about it or interacting with other people in that community, right? Most people are not fans in that sense. Um, so that and I know that like fandom does drive the financial futures of a lot of these companies these days, but they still are much smaller. They're a smaller percentage of the viewing public and the paying public than most, the most people. Yes, I'm sort of we're all on YouTube watching us stream, so we're all in this. But I so it's like making the movies for a very small percentage of the potential viewers, or making any media for that, is not a smart long-term strategy, I don't think. At least to not be as huge as an Avatar is, right? Because if he made Avatar for the Avatar nerds, which there aren't any, but let's say that they existed, if he made Avatar to with fan service all over the place, he wouldn't make nearly as much money as the way that he made Avatar, right? Which is basically anyone can watch it, don't have to have watched the previous movies, and you can really enjoy it,
Yeah, you
right?
don't need to have seen like 5 hair sex scenes in order to understand what's going on in this second movie.
And you didn't have to you didn't have to read 5,000 books and watch the anime series in the right order, and you hadn't you don't need any of that.
Yeah. Some of this shit
um
gets really dense, and I think corporations tend to overestimate how much the average person that consumes these properties really dedicates their time or money to that sort of thing.
yeah, and I think in the video game industry falls prey to that a lot too.
Number
Where
one thing I can think of just immediately off the top of my head is fucking music games with plastic instruments, Rock Band and Guitar Hero. They
yeah,
over fucking saturated that market so bad we're never gonna see one of those ever again.
well, and what I meant more, yeah, definitely they tend to do that kind of thing, and then suddenly no one wants to. Hey, those games are so popular.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to the fact that we never really hear about him anymore. You had to have been there.
I think it was too. I think what happened partly was that the financials just didn't line up,
Hmm.
because I think the licensing they had to
Oh
pay
yeah, versus the cost of manufacturing and
versus how much they
logistics of
could
the
sell the
instruments.
games
Yeah,
for. I mean, even though they were pretty expensive, right? Because it wasn't just like, and they were popular back when like games were like $50
yeah,
maybe,
yeah.
but you had to buy the guitar, right? So so Guitar Hero probably when it came out was, how much was it? George, do you remember?
I got the first Guitar Hero, and I think it was $70.
Was it
And then
was it $70?
I think Rock Band was around 150 to 199 with all of the
Yeah, because
instruments.
you had the drums. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the drums, 2 guitars, and a mic.
Guitar Hero original price. Oh, $70. Yeah, you're right. It was $70. But they had to license all those songs, right? So I can't imagine how much they were paying. So I just don't think it ended up making um, financial sense. And and rhythm games are still super popular, but um, yeah, I wonder what they'll bring. I wonder Yeah, they were just expensive, right? They were expensive to buy, and it, it was meant to be sort of like a party game, right? But if you didn't have two guitars, it was just everyone watching one person do it. So it wasn't as fun if like everyone was sort of doing it together. Um, and you know, I wonder with the advent of VR whether something like this, these sort of band games or rhythm games, will become popular again because you wouldn't need a particular guitar, right? Like if you have enough of like hand tracking and things like that with the controllers, then you can just sort of air guitar it, like literally air guitar it.
So I think like the closest thing I can think of is Beat Saber, which I think is sort of like the maximum amount of popularity that's been
Yeah,
achieved since that time. You know, who knows? Something could exceed that, but for right now, it seems like rhythm games that are that heavily interactive have really gone to the wayside, except for things like Just Dance. So, and yes, I could go on the
yeah,
prices right because I grew up fucking poor. So I know how much fucking everything costs, and I know how much the prices have changed since like
there you go.
2008 or since COVID. Yeah. I'm good with prices.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you're right. Like fan culture because everything has to be good without any criticism possible. And yeah, so and James Cameron made Avatar for James Cameron. But at the same time, like most artists make it for themselves, right? And I would rather artists
Yeah.
make things for themselves.
Shout out to Kojima.
Yeah. Or, like Miyazaki, right? Like he's making it for himself. And maybe he's making it for an audience, like, but he's not compromising it because he wants to like make sure he can sell a figurine.
They've
You know what I
got
mean?
vision, and they respect the vision more than they respect trying to appeal to a particular audience
Yeah.
because they realize that audience tastes and consumers are fickle regardless of the place.
Yeah. And you can't try to make something that's gonna, like you're saying, Chris, like that's gonna not have any any crisp. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm sure he did. But I think video games tend to be made for their hardcore player base. And I know that there have been arguments made, and maybe George has seen some of the studies, but they'll be like, well, the hardcore player base, they're the ones that'll stick around and make you money. And that sort of like coincides with my thinking that I think replayability is sort of um is a misused or overused sort of criteria or criticism or a characteristic of games that constrain sort of what games are made or like the creative the designs, and also will be used to criticize games unfairly. They'll be like I saw today someone was saying like, The Last of Us, and they're talking about The Last of Us because which is back in the public consciousness because of the HBO show.
Yeah.
And there, so a lot of people are playing it again or playing it for the first time. And then one person tweeted, it wasn't even that good a game. And look, I might not think Elden Ring is that good of a game, but Last of Us was very good for. I mean, it's still good. It still holds up
Yeah.
as a pretty good game.
Came
And
out
yes,
10 years ago
and
and
yeah,
still works.
and the person who originally had tweeted about it, that the other person was replying to, said, or other people were saying it's less of a game than it is sort of like a visual, like interactive novel. And I'm like, yeah, because that's the kind of game it was. Like it's not an open world game. It's got you're sort of playing you're playing the a character, and you have some shooting and like exploration and other types of mechanics, but it's not the same type of game. Like there are different types of games, right? So you can't judge one type of game based on the fact that it's not this other type of game and say, well, it doesn't have those things, so it sucks. And so like, and someone was like, oh yeah, I liked it but no replayability. Like, yeah, it wasn't made to be replayed. Like it's not a roguelike, right? It's not
Yeah.
it's not like some game where like replayability is
There's
the
no
game,
branching paths
right?
or multiple endings.
I mean, there might be, but at the same time, it's like it's totally okay, especially if you get a long enough game and the quality of the game is good enough that you play the game once and you never play it again. Like, how many times do you rewatch a movie? And some movies you think might be really good, but you're never gonna watch it again. Was it not worth that movie being made? Like, did you waste your time watching it? Like, I don't get it. Yeah, so like some there are some companies want that live service cash, right? Like
Yep.
Fortnite. Single player games are still striving, are still thriving though, right? And I just think that and this is something I'll sometimes fall into where I'll criticize something for it not being something else that I wanted it to be. So I'm trying to criticize things or to evaluate things based on what they are, and saying, okay, if you're saying that you're an open world blah 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 game, then I'm going to criticize you or critique you on those elements, right? That I feel should be there, or that you're missing or not missing, or that you do well or not do well, right? But I'm not going to say, well, it's not like Tetris, man, so it sucks. Like that
Yeah.
doesn't.
This Call of Duty is nothing like Madden. It sucks.
Yeah. So that and and I think that like what happens is that in a game like Fortnite or like Destiny 2 or some of these games where there are sort of live services, right? And they have monetization. They tune the game for their hardcore audience. And by doing that, they drive away a lot of the more casual people who do play regularly, but just not their whole lives on the game. And they drive away, so they're going for like a higher profit margin per player than sort of the wider audience base, and maybe a little bit less revenue per player, right? And I think that also like the people who are truly addicted to the game, like who really, really love it, they're not going to quit because like the balancing is a little off for like the most competitive modes, right? They're going to continue to play it. And I just think it's a mistake to focus on the real gamers as an audience. And I think it's something that is a mistake with a lot of these uh, cultural products as well, like like movies and TV shows.
Yeah, you need to have the fans write the Marvel movies. They'll be so much better that way. That's what they say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for everyone that's successful, there's 10 that aren't, right?
Like, and the crazy thing is that maybe, and this is something I just heard, maybe I'm misremembering, but I think BioWare, well, BioWare, BioWare made Anthem, right?
Yeah. It
And
really fucked
then,
their shit up. I got Anthem. I have Anthem on 3 systems because I got it for like $3 on
oh
PC,
yeah,
PS4, and Xbox. So
yeah, okay. So what I
it was
heard
rough.
was that resources were taken away from Mass Effect
Yep.
Andromeda before it was finished to work on Anthem. So
Oops.
instead of having, you know, one good game or like finishing one game before they start making the other shitty game, they just have two shitty games. Not shitty, because I think Mass Effect Andromeda is not shitty, but you have good game because it has like a 72 on Metacritic, so it's still good, right? A 7 out of 10 is not a bad game; it's a good game. And then Anthem, which is a complete failure.
Yeah, they really blew it with that one.
And Anthem looked nice. It had a great idea, I think. I think that the flying around is pretty fun to do. Like the idea that you're a mech pilot. Come on, how could that game fail? But it did because it was just boring. It was boring, and they didn't get any of the balancing right. The loot was just boring. All
Yeah,
of it
and
was
not
just
enough shit
not
to do.
was half baked. So I don't know who they were trying to. I don't know what market they were trying to. But they basically ruined Mass Effect for like 5 years.
Yeah.
And you know what? And we won't talk about this too much longer. But I don't. I don't. To a large extent, I feel like a lot of game developers, and this is probably more true for like the AAA side because they actually hear a lot of this chatter, is that they can't really listen to the literal words that a lot of the fans say because
Yeah.
a lot of them will be like, well, okay, I don't want another Shepherd, right? I don't want Shepherd to come back. I want new things, right? Like we just can't have continued more and more sequels, right? But then also they'll be angry when it's not Shepherd. They'll be like, we want Shepherd back, right? So like there's tons and tons of I think there's a lot of hinting. And I think definitely Mass Effect 4 or 5, whatever they're going to call it, Mass Effect 5 maybe, I forget what they're going to call it, is going to come back to Earth and like it'll be in the future, but they don't know what's going to happen. But there's a lot of hinting that like Shepard is going to come back, or some of the characters from the original trilogy are going to come back. And in my mind, I don't want that at all. I don't want any of that. Like I want something new. I want a new storyline. I want new characters. I don't need to be like a baby sort of holding on to these old characters and these old like they had a good run, man. Like they saved the universe.
Yeah,
Like
it's
I
run its
don't
course.
yeah. There's a glitch in Anthem where item drops rates like 10 times and people were having a lot of fun. Then Bioware was like, too bad and patched it out. That's sort of like if
That's the sort of shit that gets
yeah,
people like excited about games, is like those glitches and those flaws
yeah.
that sort of just make it unique, make
And
it a
then
fun,
Bioware
interesting experience.
Bioware was like, we don't want you to have fun. So and like it's the thing that saved Diablo 3 was that they upped the drop rates. Right? They were like,
I remember how badly it was received initially, and now it's almost as if those memories are completely gone.
well, it was really poorly received because they tuned the drop rates for people to have to spend money in the real world cash
Yeah,
shop, in
their
the auction
live,
or in the auction
real
house,
life
right?
auction.
So the drop rates were horrible, and but so people were like not having fun. They're like, well, I don't want to spend real money, but my drop rates suck, and there's no real end game, so I just stopped playing. So Blizzard was like, fuck, we got to get. So instead of just like deleting the cash shop, they're like, well, we got to remove the cash shop in America at least because no one likes it, or the auction house, and then we're gonna up the drop rate. So it's like if they had only done one of the two, if they had just removed the auction house, but it kept the drop rates, I don't think that would have worked, right? They had to do both at the same time. And it's like, why do these, like, I swear to God, it's probably not even the developers making the decision. It's some fucking suit, right? It's
Yeah,
some
it's
business.
always someone in middle management or a producer that has a lot to say but doesn't really have any experience building anything,
Yeah.
playing anything, knowing anything about the property they're working on.
Like, I hope Shepard doesn't come back. They need a new hero. I agree. And I'm not saying it has to be Ryder or whatever they had in Mass Effect Andromeda, right? But just come up with someone new. And I don't even want it to be someone like Liara, right? Liara would not be new. She's old. We know who she is. And I
Dude,
don't want it to
VR
be
is
like,
boring as shit.
and I don't want it to be like Shepard's son or daughter or offspring with Liara. I don't want it to be like the offspring of someone else, right? It just they create a universe of fucking aliens and everything. They just find someone else, someone new, get creative. But I just fear that they're going to be like, well, the fans say they want to have Shepard, and the most loud people who bray on the internet, who threaten that they're going to boycott, which they're never going to. Not even Garrus. I don't want Garrus. I don't want anyone who is in any of the fucking other games to be in it. Nobody.
Man, women love Garrus though. Shout
Yeah,
out to
he
him.
is their alien daddy, right?
Yeah.
But I don't want anyone. Like, I just want them totally new. That's one thing I really kind of liked about Mass Effect Andromeda. There are a lot of things I liked about it, but one of Did I love the characterizations of Ryder? No, I think they were poorly written. But I like that it was a completely new cast of people. I could get to know them, right? I just think it would be super. I don't know. I just want something new. Right? I don't want. We had 3 games. We had 3 games and a lot of DLC, and we had a lot. We had a lot of novels, comic book. We have it. Okay. We need something new because I want Mass Effect to continue going. But if I get to be like 80 years old and we're still telling stories about Shepard or the line of Shepard, I'm gonna be kind of angry about it. And that's one thing I don't even like about the new Star Wars movies. Like they couldn't just start a new story with like new people. They had to make this Rey like related to Palpatine. They had to have one of the Kenobi, and they didn't even do it as well as like the extended novels anyway, right? So like they already had
Yeah.
it. They had a huge stuck in his bureaucracy job and CSEC. I don't know. There's a rumor because there was an ad for PS5 that aired, or maybe it was on the internet, where they're gonna have a new Uncharted game, and it's gonna be their daughter who's the new protagonist. I think that's okay. I think she was a cool character, but I would almost, if you're gonna do an Uncharted, I'd be okay with no more Uncharted games as much as I like them. Right? Come up with something else. Or like one of the other, like the Uncharted, the Lost Tales or whatever, or the Lost Legacy. It was just 2 ancillary characters, right? Or very
I
minor
really liked
characters.
that game. That was a
Yeah, there
good
were 2
game.
minor characters from the original 4 games or so, and it was like it was a spinoff, right? I think I like that. That's cool. Do something like that. There got to be other adventurers out there, right? Like it's not like there was one game and we're looking for a sequel. There were fucking 4 of them. Okay, like yes, exactly. There's so much to explore in the setting, right? I mean, they built this huge, amazing universe and mythos, right? I mean, I think the Reapers and all that stuff is such a fun. They spent all this time creating this new universe, but is the only window into it going to be this one Earth dude or woman? That seems very like a waste of a setting.
I forgot what they're called, but I would love to play as one of those like telepathic jellyfish guys.
Yeah,
Have sex as one of those guys.
the
That's what I
Hanar,
want.
the Hanar.
Yeah.
I want to play as Blasto.
Yeah, spice things up.
Blasto, the Hanar Hanar N7 agent.
Yep.
Hot take: you play as a grown-up kid who was talking to his grandpa about the shepherd in the epilogue. Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, I don't know where they would go with this, right? Because they have to come up with another grand. I think they're probably sort of constrained with having to go into another grand direction, right? They're not going to be able to do some very small story. I think they're sort of locked into the idea that because what Mass Effect was and what made it popular. Though it would be hilarious is if they came out with like a Mass Effect Stardew Valley.
That would
Like
work.
a Mass Effect like Harvest Moon.
Yeah. Something that focuses on relationships and something that doesn't necessarily have like a discrete beginning and end. It's sort of like something that goes through like a continuous cycle.
Yes, I think they should go back to Andromeda. Give me the fucking Solarian Arc DLC, okay? Give me that. And I know that there was like a book and something, but of like real-time strategy, base building game set in the Mass Effect universe, but you're not Andromeda, right? So instead of playing like the role-playing game, right, the first person sort of, like play someone who's like the administrator for one of the planets, and like you just have to be annoyed when Ryder comes around to fuck shit up, and then for the most of the rest of the time you're trying to like grow food and stuff. Make that game. That'd be amazing. I think people would enjoy it because I think the Mass Effect universe as a whole just has much more possibility than guy run around shoot things, right? Because that's basically what the games are, right?
Yep.
Guy run around shoot stuff. He's doing it to save the world, but guy run around shoot stuff. That's and look, I love those games. I'm not saying that you can't, but you play as Director 10. But is my face tired? So, anyway, my obligatory rant about video games.
We gotta have one on every episode.
I know. Oh, we can't forget the Jack Jack.
Jack Jack does not have a weekly deal this week.
Oh,
I
man.
think I deceived our audience by saying this would be a weekly thing. It really just depends on what kinds of sales are out there right now. The only thing that she really mentioned this past week was family-sized chips were definitely heavily discounted at Costco. I don't remember the exact price figure here, but I think it was something to the effect of like 40% off, give or take. So shout out to Lay's and Ruffles, heavily discounted at Costco. That's about all I've got, but nothing specific this week.
Oh, all
But I'll
right.
stay posted. If there's any really, really good deals, I'll be sure people know. Shout out to Jag Jag, Asian
Yeah,
America's sweetheart.
that's right. That's right. They did just release those what is it? What do they call them? Squishmallows, like the big
Squishables.
squish. Well, but I think the exact brand name is called like Squishmallow or
Okay.
something. The Pikachu and another Pokemon version, like a 20-inch one, pretty big.
Yeah.
I think they sold out in a day.
I'm not surprised at all.
Last thing, Adam, about last week with cars. If you're adventurous, you should consider Italian cars like Maserati and Alfa Romeo. I am very nervous about their reliability. I think some of them are beautiful. And also from some of the reviews I've seen, people are like, they're not as nice inside as you would think. Like, so their interiors are not as good as and sort of cheap, right? Like a lot of these luxury brands, like they have some very premium touches on the interiors, and then they cut costs somewhere else in the interior. So it's like, I don't know.
This
But
sounds
yeah,
like
I mean,
anti-Italian discrimination to me.
yeah. But you're getting a Ferrari engine. They lost to Ford. I mean, all those years ago. Yeah, I mean, look, like Ferrari engine might be great. I don't know, but I don't know. Ferrari's known for reliability. I don't think so. So we'll see. I mean, Maseratis look nice, but like these are always leased, right? Who buys a Maserati, right? Yeah, exactly. Sopranos.
Yeah.
Italian. Yeah. Generation Sopranos.
You got to
I'm
get
finding
Sill
it.
up.
I'm finding it. Where? Oh, I have it in the wrong window. Give me a second.
Pressure's on.
Anti-Italian discrimination.
He speaks the truth.
So yeah, I mean, buy them used, they'd appreciate like a stone. Yeah, I mean, I've thought about it. I've thought about almost every car brand at this point. I've looked at. So, but I've never actually ridden in one. So I might see if I can find one. I can just listen. Yeah, that'd take all my monies. One last thing we did want to touch on. Did we want to touch on the fact that everyone was upset about that headline in the Wall Street Journal, right? I think it was Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, it was
Uh,
WSJ.
are there too many Asians, right? From a few days, like from a week ago.
Yep.
And the guy who wrote the article, so the article's flawed. I mean, it wasn't agreeing with that book, but there are a lot of flaws anyway. But you discovered
Yeah.
he has 4 adopted daughters from China.
Yep. Yep. And I was like, that scummy shit tracks. I mean, the kind of people that would be attracted to adoption tend to have these fucked up sort of political views. Former speechwriter for the George W. Bush administration. So we're not talking about the most culturally cosmopolitan person here who has a complex understanding of the nuances of culture.
He was the chief speechwriter for President George W. Bush.
I'm thinking, no. I was thinking like he may have done the Axis of Evil speech, but no, that was from. So
No, that was from, yeah.
Yeah.
They're very religious, of course. The whole like concern about the faux concern about China's dropping population is just so funny juxtaposed to how everyone was like panicking about how much, how many people China have, which they still sort of do it, even though they'll also have headlines about, China's going to disappear, or like their population is dropping too fast. And then what's the impact? And then it's always the next thing is like, what's the impact on our economy? What's the impact on the things we like to buy? Right.
Yeah.
And then there was all this criticism about the one child policy. But then when it sort of seems to be working, they're like, oh, too few Asians now.
Yeah, we need coolies to make stuff.
So many different, messages. So
yeah, all with the hopes that China collapses and is no longer an economic rival. So fingers crossed on their behalf.
Yeah, and as much as as we complain about how you can't really speak like honestly to like a lot of other people about like criticizing your adoption, we're Korean, so there isn't as much, I think, geopolitical sort of pushback you get. Like people might say like, well, Korea was poor, and then you're like, well, not really. But there's no like political argument you'll really get into.
No, exactly.
For most normies, because you're not necessarily going to talk about the Korean War, because that's not really a contemporary problem. But for the Chinese adoptees, it's much more geopolitically.
Oh God, yeah.
Right. Like so, and especially since most of them are women, and from what I know, the one child policy. I mean, obviously, it was not a perfect thing, right? There were some problems with it, but they'll literally be like, we saved you because of all the scare stories of like, the women, girl babies were just their heads were just dashed on rocks all over the place, or killed and suffocated. So it's like,
a lot of ventilators.
You, so
yeah.
So like you're literally saved, right? So it's like, I think, and because of the general xenophobic attitude, right, and all the geopolitical tensions, I can imagine just very, very difficult for them to have any conversation about like, oh, I'm feeling I have complex feelings, or I'm dealing with a lot of some issues that probably stem from my adoption. Like, it just be super hard for them to do it.
Yeah. I mean, even forming a sense of pride in where they come from.
Yeah.
When all the discourse in English is not the most kind or understanding. So, I mean, when I see Chinese adoptees engaging in what I think is explicit and blatant self-hatred, I have to contextualize it with the fact that, what other models or examples have they been shown that would teach them otherwise? Who else would articulate what a positive understanding of that looks like? And, aside from the weird corners of Twitter that I'm on, like I don't really hear it anywhere. So yeah, it's always something that is worth putting into context and considering in the larger scheme of things.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
I think we covered everything today.
I think we covered everything. Hopefully I'll finally make a decision on a car. I think I'll just not buy anything.
That is the easiest decision to make.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, we don't like interracial relationships here. Just kidding.
Yes, and Stinger GT, baby. That's right. Anyway, all right. Thanks, everybody. We really appreciate you guys sticking with us. We had a long stream today.
It's because of you guys.
Yeah,
Making for
absolutely.
good conversation. We couldn't do it
thank
without
you. So
you.
much. And we'll be back next week, of course, for stream 15. I can't believe we've had 14 weeks that we've done this.
Yeah, we've had consistency with it.
Yeah,
had some discipline with it. I'm very happy with the result.
Yeah. So thanks, everybody. And I am off to maybe sleep.
Hey, that sounds good to me. I think I'm about to do the same.
And we will keep it going.
Yup.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Till next time,
Good night.
guys.